Our guest today is former New South Wales police member Craig Semple. Craig was a copper for 25 years, during which he carved out a stellar career, specialising in high-risk law enforcement. Among other things, he investigated high-profile homicides, organised crime and outlaw motorcycle gangs. Craig was exposed to high levels of stress, huge workloads and a culture that encouraged alcohol use as a coping strategy. Eventually, Craig suffered irreversible burnout, which he describes in his book, The Cop Who Fell to Earth. Craig's second book, Getting Back Up Again, focuses on his ongoing recovery work. Craig joins us on Australian True Crime to talk about where he's been and where he finds himself now. This is Australian True Crime. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which this podcast is created, the Wurundjeri Woi Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation. And a warning, this episode of the podcast contains graphic descriptions of violence.
1993, I'd only been in the police force for 5 years at that point. An outback town called Hay, only 3,000 people, in between Sydney and Adelaide, right out in the middle of nowhere. I often talk about that homicide in terms of the fact that at that time I was only maybe just turned 24 years of age, and I'd investigated on the outside, homicides in the city, but I was always the junior man there. Mm. Whereas out in Hay, I was the only detective in that town, so it was a sole plainclothes spot, and I'd only just started my formal detectives, the academic side of my training, so I was still unqualified as a detective. But one of the great things about investigating that homicide, as tragic as it was out there for me, was, if I was still in the city when that murder happened, then homicide squad or senior detectives would have run it, and I would have been lucky to be the coffee boy. But out there in the outback where I was it. So I had to basically pick the ball up and run as best I could. So help was always a long way away. So basically I learnt my profession by being thrown in the deep end of the pool and learning to swim. So it was really good for professional and personal growth. But it also gave me, that particular murder gave me a massive insight into how important homicide investigations is, particularly with regard to our support for the families left behind.
What were the circumstances around that homicide?
So young Andrew Lockhart, I think he was only about a year or two younger than me. He was he was from the city. He was working the outback as a jackaroo on a sheep station out there. And he and his friends, short story is, he and his friends just went out for a drink on the Friday or Saturday night. There was just one of the locals. There was always, in those outback towns, some friction between what they call the townies and the people working out in properties. Oh. But he and his friends already started walking home. Unbeknown to him, there was a fight outside the pub that he'd left after he'd left. And one of the guys involved in it had pulled a big Bowie knife out and slashed another participant across the chest and opened him up. He ran away. But the guy with the knife, his name was Troy Gash, he wasn't satisfied with that. He ran after this group who had nothing to do with anything and ran up behind them and stabbed Andrew in the back quite brutally and inflicted what turned out to be fatal wounds.
How do you talk to the family and support the family through that? Homicide's always terrible, but I think in most cases there is some kind of precursor to it. That's my sense. It's people who know each other. But in this case, in an absolutely random, stupid attack.
It was such a waste of a young life. It was, for me, I guess that's where it hit me, because I'd worked all night. I got called out late at night and had worked all through the following day. Travelled 170 Ks over to Narendra to go through the bail court proceedings. And then I was on my way back when I got the radio message that Andrew's beautiful parents had arrived at the sheep station. And so I obviously knew I had to go to talk to them straight away. And I think that was when it hit me how unprepared I was to how to deal with that. For me, if someone died in a car accident, and I had to go and pass that news on to someone, there was always an explanation as to why this happened.
Yeah.
Even drug overdoses, all those sorts of things. But when it comes to the senseless taking of someone's life for absolutely no reason, with no provocation. It was actually explaining the why was the hardest part of that whole conversation. And just to see, it's really hard. Like, I've seen a lot of grief throughout my career in the police and plenty since as well. And I don't think I've ever seen a raw form of grief on a human face than what I saw on Andrew's parents' face that particular day when I went and broke the news.
It's just completely unexpected, completely ridiculous, infuriating, all those things. And then, I mean, you end up supporting the family for years sometimes through the court process, through all that stuff.
Look, I'm still very, very close friends with Ron and Narelle, and we've been in touch with each other. They've stayed at my house at different times over those years. Yeah, wow. It's like it's a level of support and care that there's no other crime that I don't think that I've ever felt that I really needed to provide that level of care that I did for them. They're just some absolutely beautiful people too. And I mean, they came up when my first book was published, they came up for the book launch, and it was just beautiful. It's always been great to have them in my life.
That's incredible. And you have experienced that side of things in a way, haven't you? The being the family of a victim. Your brother very nearly was murdered.
Yeah, well, it was definitely the shoe was on the other foot. I was out in the middle of the outback. By this time, I was working in Wagga as a detective there, and this is 1998, so it's 5 years later. And I was out there camping with my first wife and our first son. And I got woken up about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning with headlights shining through my tent. And I was out in the middle of nowhere, and I'm thinking, what's going on here? Anyway, got out. It's a police car. I thought I was getting called into work. But they said, mate, your brother's been stabbed and you need to get into town and make some phone calls. So
now, he was a copper too, wasn't he?
Yeah, he'd only, so 2 weeks earlier, I'd very proudly attended the Golden Police Academy, where I graduated as a cop, and with my family as well, and proudly watched my brother walk out of that academy in the same blue uniform that I did. And I think it was a really special moment for the pair of us, because we were always brothers in blood, but now we're brothers in blue. And that was pretty important to the pair of us. And then he was a big boy. Like, he's, I'm quite a solid 6'2" fellow. He's 6'5", and even fitter than me. And
yeah, he's a unit. I saw a photo of him. He's a unit.
He is definitely a monster, but he's but to see him walk so strong and proudly out of that academy 2 weeks earlier, and the next time I saw him, he was pretty much on life support in a hospital. It was like, it was pretty shocking. It was only 2 weeks.
Now, you're the older brother, aren't you?
Yeah.
So was there a sense of guilt that he's followed you into this profession that you were clearly succeeding in and loving, and in just 2 weeks he's on life support?
Yeah, so it was the guilt. I wasn't really aware of the impact of that on me until many years later, when eventually I ended up getting lots of therapy. But at that time, I reflected, because we didn't have any phone service, which is why the police had to come and get me out of the bush. There was mobile phones for very, very early days then. But so I had a 3-hour drive from Hay to Wagga to try to get on a flight to go to Sydney to be with him. And that whole 3 hours, I was racked with guilt, because all I remember was before my brother joined the police, when he made that decision, he had called me, and he'd had 2 job offers at that point. One was his application to the police force was accepted, and his application to go to Duntroon to the military college was also accepted. He got both of them on the same day, and he just couldn't make his mind up. He's very military orientated, but he couldn't make his mind up what to choose. And I said to him, I still remembered it, mate, I don't know much about the military, but I know how good a time I'm having in the police force and how amazing this job is. So I sort of felt guilt, I guess, partly because maybe I felt like it wasn't so much that I'd let him down this path. I was actually more feeling guilty about facing my parents, that they might think that, this wouldn't have happened if I hadn't have steered him down that direction.
But mind you, I mean, knowing what we know now about what our collective future lay in the late 90s, I mean, he would have seen combat if he'd gone to Duntroon. So you just never know, do you? What's around the corner?
No, you don't know. It's I don't know. It took me a while to sort of accept that was probably one of the big driving emotions behind it, where I sort of took that later on as well. But yeah, it was a long time before I knew that he was definitely out of the woods. Like he definitely nearly died. He lost 5 litres of blood on that street that night, and it was all over nothing other than a couple of Panadol tablets that someone was trying to sell him as drugs while he was walking along off duty in the street.
And he continued with police, didn't he?
Yeah, so poor old Pete Forsyth, who was his partner that night, who was with him on the street, he died. So he got stabbed as well and died on top of my brother while he's trying to render assistance to my brother. And so it was such a tragic period of time. I still remember in the funeral for Peter at the cathedral in Sydney, for the first time, I saw his wife, widow Jackie, walk in with their kids. And that really hit me because his kids were basically the same age as mine as well. They were only little toddlers, and so that was a big thing. But yeah, it was a pretty tough time, that whole journey through there. But the Jason went on. Not only did he continue his career, but I still remember, this is way before people were talking about mental health issues in the police. And I remember he was recuperating at my mum's house when he got released from hospital, and I said to him, "Mate, you don't have to go back to this." Like, I just thought, how can anyone possibly go back after what they've just experienced only 2 weeks into that career? And he said, "Mate, you've got to be kidding, aren't you? I'm going to get back, and I'm going to get back as fast as I can." And he did. And he really pushed hard to get through all the medicals to get himself back into the job. And once he was in, he didn't hold back. He went into tactical operations and became one of the best snipers in the country. So, yeah.
Wow. He didn't take a backward step, did he?
He was not that he's ever seen himself as a victim, but he was never going to go and allow himself to be on the wrong side of that ever again.
So did it change? Did it affect the way that you approach families of victims and victims of violent crime? I mean, you've already spoken about the fact that you had the capability of forming very close bonds with families already. But did this experience change the way that you approached families?
I don't think so. It's a fair question. But I think I always possessed a huge amount of empathy for victims, and so I don't think so. I felt very, very uncomfortable in this, even though it was my brother was stabbed. Our families as a collective was very much impacted, and I actually preferred to be the detective in charge of these matters. I didn't like sitting in the spot because in that role, I've got control.
Yeah.
But there's a real lack of control being in the other camp. And I think that really got drilled home pretty hard for me when, we're just talking about Ron and Narelle with their son, whose stabbing murder I investigated. That they arrived at the hospital while Jason's up in intensive care and came to, because the first thing Ron said on the phone to me in the ward was, "Mate, we're downstairs. We're hoping to see you. You supported us through the stabbing of our son. We want to support you through the stabbing of your brother as well." And that's where it really hit me, the whole,
how the tables had turned.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it was significant, but also a beautiful thing that they did to have that thought to come and do that for our family as well.
That's incredible. You do meet, I mean, I always say to people that I meet the most incredible people through this job, through podcasting and talking about crime. But I can't imagine what you see sometimes in people, the good and the bad.
Yeah. And look, I've got to admit, my outlook has softened a lot. So I've been out of the police force now for about 13 years. And in the police, I was pretty black and white. There's victims and there's offenders, and that's it. There's no grey in the middle. But these days, I do understand that a lot of people who engage in criminality, there's a lot of things that go on in their lives as well. Many
have been victimised.
Yeah, exactly. It's victimised or even just heading into drug addiction and things like that. It's easy to sit back sometimes, and I don't reflect poorly on myself for having those pretty firm opinions and beliefs and judgments back then. Like, it was my job, my role. My primary role was to protect the victims. But, particularly in my roles with mental health, education, etc. these days, I've got a bit more of a broader view of the whole of it all. But I even look back on my career, and there's plenty of times where I had, although we saw ourselves as opposition, even with outlaw motorcycle gang members and others, if as long as there was a level of respect shown to me, I would always try to show that level of respect back as well. So it wasn't all just you're my enemy and I'm just going to take you down. I had some really good relationships as far as criminals went back in the old days as well, because a lot of our information, especially for me in drug work, came from the criminal element. Like, we had to recruit informants.
It seems as though that comes part and parcel with the drug squad, that you have to cultivate informants and develop, to some level, you develop relationships with offenders.
Yeah, it is. And I've said this to young cops as well over the years, is that the depth of character that's required for that sort of work.
Yes.
You've got to, your communication skills have got to be like really in tune. Like, there's no point in me talking to a drug addict who is, I'm trying to recruit as an informant, like the way I would talk to a King's Counsel barrister. It's like, got to really get down to everyone's level and then rise to others, when I'm going to court, that sort of thing as well. So it's such a stimulating, like, even just fostering all those relationships. It's fantastic. I just loved it so much.
There's a lot of danger, I think, and tell me what you think about this, because it seems to me, and I know to others who follow crime, that the drug squad is the most often mentioned when we talk about corruption, serious corruption, generation after generation after generation. So it seems to me that that's the risk with that building of relationships.
Oh, absolutely it is. We saw that in the Royal Commission. There was plenty that was exposed, which is why the police force ended up bringing in pretty tight rules about our engagement with informants and in our recruitment processes, but even our contact with them over the period after the recruitment. It's so tight that, and this is one of the things I say to a lot of people now, that the police force these days, there's actually, things can happen, but it's such a rigid, the culture of the police has changed so much from when I joined, that I actually don't think it's possible to engage in corrupt activity anymore.
But it's funny, hearing you say that, all I can hear in my ears is people in the street who will complain and have complained to me and say, the coppers have got no discretion anymore. In the old days, they knew everyone in the shop, and if they came in the shop and you gave them a chalky milk, that was fine. And, and so we had relationships and all that. So, we know that for many reasons police can never win. But do you find that? Do people talk to you about that too, about police in the old days? Lots of complaints about police in the old days, but also lots of missing that sort of discretion that police used to have.
Yeah, look, it's hard to... I try not to apply yesterday's culture with today's, world that we live in. It's hard to do that. But in saying that too, everything was just easier in the old days. Even just the computer, it was just, there was no red tape. Technology came in, it was supposed to help us out. But with a police force, like every other government and private sector enterprise, all we've done is use it to tie ourselves down. And back when I first joined the police force, we could charge someone, and it was all in quadruplicate carbon back paper on a typewriter. Yeah. We could have someone process in an hour, and we'd be back out in the street doing it all over again. Now it's like a half-day process just for a simple arrest.
For the paperwork.
Just for the paperwork side of it. There's so many systems you've got to go through. Doing a search warrant in the old days, which, when I started out with drug work, apply for a search warrant, 2 or 3 of you go out and do the raid and have it all done, hour and a half, back home to the police station, charge them, all done really quickly. These days, a simple raid takes an entire day, and it involves 4 times as many police to do it.
And the matters used to get to court so much quicker in those days as well. Now it's years.
It's totally different. One of the things I think with, when people have, like I said, I just don't see that there's any possibility of corruption anymore without people being found out very, very quickly. It's just the culture's changed. No one's going to put up with it. The processes are very rigid. But by the same token, I don't envy today's serving police. The level of intrusive oversight they have is there's just no comparison to what we had. We had next to none. But everyone's got a phone these days. Anyone's being arrested, and sometimes this phone footage doesn't show the true context of what led to whatever the arrest happened as well. And it's a tough world out there for today's cops. Plus, they got just way more stress, I reckon, than what we ever had as well.
Yeah, I think younger people would say that's across the board, actually, for most young members of our workforce. When we were talking just recently about your sort of respect for sometimes a level of respect for offenders, I was thinking about an offender who once said to me that he had respect for police, and this was an old school guy. He said he had respect for police, and he said, to tell you the truth, if I ever ended up in custody, I always thought I'd done my job badly. That was his attitude.
Well, there was some people who were just bad, and they were, they're psychopathic, really. But then there's others who just, there was a lot who just saw it as a game. It's a real cops and robbers game, It was just like a game of football with opposing sides. So yeah, look, there was very few times where I actually felt like I got emotionally involved in really having a deep-seated anger or anything towards people that I was investigating. I mean, there was some that were just like the lowest as you can possibly get, but overall, it never really got to that.
If you'd like to talk to someone about abuse that's taken place in your life, no matter how long ago it happened, your GP is always a good place to start. If that's not going to work for you, you can contact 1-800-RESPECT on 1-800-737-732 or via their website 1800respect.org.au. Or you can call Lifeline's 24-hour phone counselling service on 13 11 14.
What about, though, the Christmas party? The police Christmas party that the Finks Motorcycle Club showed up to. I mean, that wasn't a good day.
Yeah, no, that had been a big year too. I just wound up another homicide investigation near Yamba only 2 days before this incident happened. And we had a detectives' Christmas party at a hotel in Coffs Harbour. Lawyers were there, forensic detectives were there. We had everyone, a lot of the wives and partners and that were there as well. And it was just really our time to, all of us had different roles in the justice system. It was just our time to let our hair down and actually celebrate a little bit for Christmas and see a bit positive in the world. And unfortunately, though, we had run a couple of operations on the Finks Outlaw Motorcycle Gang throughout that year. My brother was involved in one of them. I had to fire some rounds at someone during a buy-bust drug deal. And anyway, they just didn't appreciate the fact that they got so much attention. So they got wind of our Christmas party, and they got a team together, including bikies from Interstate, and they sent them into our pub to cause some problems.
That is a serious operation from their perspective, isn't it?
So, well, basically, like myself and one of my colleagues, we went inside because we had an outdoor area booked for the night, but that was closing. So we were going in just to find some tables to bring everyone in and relocate inside. And while we were doing that, my colleague just got pushed really hard from behind, nearly knocked him over, and I didn't know what had happened. And my mate didn't either. He thought he must have got in someone's way, and he apologised and then went off to the bar to get some drinks. And then I looked down, and I didn't know he was a bikie at that point, but he had the steroid muscle build and all the neck tattoos and what have you there, and gold chains. And he'd yelled out some abusive comment to my mate as he walked away. And then I just leaned down to him and said, mate, all he said was sorry. And with that, I got king hit. So he smashed me in the jaw. And I watched it all on the CCTV camera footage later on, and I got knocked completely out of the camera range. And then, as much as back then I didn't see myself as Jeff Fennick, I didn't have a glass drawer either. And so I came back in and I was ready to defend myself. And from point blank range, this guy had brought in with him an empty beer glass ready for this and just pegged it at my face, baseball style, full pace. And somehow or other, I don't know how I did it, but my reflexes just got my arm up just in time and blocked it before it hit me in the eyes. So it split my arm open. And anyway, all security.
What were the wives doing, by the way?
They were still outside, so we hadn't moved them in. So the security ran in and grabbed me before I went back, and this guy was putting on some knuckle dusters ready to really do some harm. And then, so I got dragged one way. He got dragged out to the other bar, but that's where all his team were waiting for him. So he got sent in to cause the problems, and they were ready to come in and back him up. So they regrouped while I'm getting my arm bandaged up in the pub. I see there's absolute chaos going on outside the hotel. I run out there, and these guys had just gone through our Christmas party. They were totally unaware. Everyone outside was unaware of what had happened, and they just went in and started swinging. And one of my mates was knocked out cold. They laid the boot into his head while he was unconscious, and tables are getting overturned. When I walked out there and saw this running battle up and down the street, it looked like, honestly, like a Wild West, like something you'd see in a movie. There's just pitched street fights up and down the street with, off-duty cops who are just totally on the back foot, just trying their hardest to hold the ground. And it just kept running on like that. So I got involved in more issues out there as well. And until, all the police turned up and we managed to round up I think it was about 5 of them all up we got that day, and then another one later on as well. But, that was probably, I'd had some issues until that time. And that homicide that happened at Yamba, I ended up having some big issues with that, moving on down the track as well, mentally. It was a real turning point in my mental health, that particular murder. But this only happened a couple of days later.
And I feel like if you felt powerless sitting there when your brother had been stabbed, how did this feel? You're on your own patch, you're surrounded by other coppers, and you've been ambushed like this. This must have been very...
At that time, I was in deep shock. I was just shocked. Yep. I just thought, what happened there? Like, we'd done nothing to bring this on. It didn't make sense. And then later on, after I got out of hospital, went back to the police station and then, got filled in by the investigators saying that these guys are the Think Spiky gangs. Like, they've actually come here with this intent to do what they did tonight. And then it all made sense. But then for me, a real deep anger set in as well, because even in the world of cops and robbers, there are some unwritten rules that you just don't break. And one of them is when cops are off duty, they're off duty. And particularly when they're with their families, there's only been some very rare circumstances where gangsters have crossed that line, and these guys did it. So for me, it was pretty much a time where we thought, well, this has happened. Now what do we need to take back control now. These guys cannot be allowed to get away with this, because if they do, every other bikie gang is going to see that they can do it as well. And it was going to send a really bad message. And unfortunately for us, probably it was still lingering effects after the Royal Commission. There was still a lot of, not just caution, there was a lot of fear, and a lot of managers were very, very worried about, anything looking adverse from police at all. And they were really worried that if we went and then took action to shut down this bikie gang, that it would look like some sort of revenge and you know what I'm saying?
I do, absolutely. It's what we were saying earlier. Police can't win.
No, so for me, that was very frustrating, because I know for the generation of cops that I'd joined the police force with, this would never be tolerated. These guys would cease to exist as a gang in the old days, definitely even 10 years before this incident happened. And
you look back at the warfare that went on in Victoria between Victoria Police, the Armed Robbery Squad, and Melbourne's Armed Robbers. I mean, that was all-out war and very few checks and balances, it seems to me. I'm sure they felt as though they were still restrained, but compared to now...
Yeah, well, and that's it. For me, it was just a total lack of leadership and a total lack of support for us but not only us as police, but we were also victims in this.
Yeah, and your partners.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we're very good at promoting victim support for other people involved in crime. But when it comes to, when we're the victims, maybe that back then, things have changed a lot now, but back then there was not much of that for us. And we even got let down through the judicial process when these guys went to trial as well. It was a pretty clear turning point in my work with drugs and also our motorcycle gangs, because I'd only been working in the command up at Coffs Harbour, Grafton for probably only about a year before this happened. And my dealings with bikie gangs in other areas I've worked in regional New South Wales were quite limited. There had been some issues at different times, but nothing over the top. And after these guys did their attack, for me, it got really personal from that time on. I just saw bikie gangs everywhere I went. Pretty much for the next 10 years of my career, I just lived and breathed it. It just didn't matter what I did. There was another bikie job. I became quite obsessive in the way I was doing my job, but that sort of happened after my brother got stabbed too, to some degree. So, but we had 6 bikie gangs in our one command.
So you kind of got to be obsessive, haven't you?
Yeah, there was so many. So there was a lot of stuff going on at that period of time. But the jobs I worked on with different bikie gangs over that period of time too, and a lot of it was with technical surveillance. So, having phones tapped and listening devices and those sorts of things, undercover operatives. And, over that next 10 years, I got a real deep insight and understanding in how outlaw motorcycle gangs work. Also got insight in how much it changed too. Talking about how much the police force has changed. The dynamics of bikie gangs has changed immensely over the last few decades as well.
Well, a lot of the blokes don't ride bikes, no. I'm told.
Nike bikies are often referred to as. So the bikies that for the era of policing where I came into it, it was sort of, they were always smelly.
Yeah.
Dirty, wet denim and leather wearing, riding boots, big beards, mostly just pot smoking and heavy drinkers and just a lot of antisocial behaviour. But these days, all the bikies are running around with, designer barber haircuts, waxed eyebrows, aftershave, all the gold chains, all the buff steroids and tattoos and everything's Gucci. And it's just like, bring back the old days. I prefer the smelly bikies by a long shot. But you're right, half of them don't ride motorbikes at all. It's just a lot of the bikie gangs now are front just for other organised crime activities.
We should talk about the crime in Yamba, because I've noticed that you do bring it up. You speak about it quite often, and as you've already said to us, it was pivotal in your life and your career. But I feel as though you don't often give a lot of detail about it. Tell us about it as much as you want to and why it's so significant to you.
Well, there's 2 parts of that. So the reason I don't usually share it in too much detail is I'm always cautious of how much I give that might traumatise people listening to it. In the book, for good reason, I've written it out in very explicit detail.
We're a pretty tough crowd here. I wouldn't worry about us.
I was going to say, if you want it, you can have it. So what happened was, it was a Sunday, and I rarely work Sundays. It was only because I had a mountain of briefs and paperwork to get through, which I couldn't do on a working day. So I went in for some quiet time, and anyway, the call came through. Something had happened down at this farmhouse at Yamba, which is 40 minutes from where I was working at Grafton, and that was my area. So there's just something about the nature of the call that came over the radio that just sometimes cops develop a real keen sixth sense instinct over time. And it was just, even though there was nothing major in that initial call, I felt something that was more to it. So I jumped in the car and screamed down there, down to Yamba, and turned up. There was one uniformed bloke there who hadn't gone in the house. And there was a couple of guys with him who I actually originally thought were suspects, but they turned out not to be later on. But anyway, from the nature of the call, I knew something bad had happened in there, just didn't know to what extent. So I left him out the front, and I had to get inside and do 2 jobs. One of those jobs was to make sure that no one needed medical help. And the other job while I was in there was to clear that house of danger and make it safe for whoever I called in afterwards. So with that, went round the back of the house, front door was locked, and I took out my firearm. And before I entered the house, I went through a process where I psyched myself up that once I went through this house, it was almost mentally like saying to myself, mate, as soon as you get through this door of this house, if you're confronted with a threat, do not hesitate to pull the trigger. You hesitate, you are dead. It's really pumping up my whole fight-flight system. Now, I didn't understand how the whole stress response, fight-flight response worked back then. We didn't get any training on that stuff. And
the effect that it's having on your nervous system.
Yeah, well, all I knew was from what I'd had in previous experiences. If you pumped on adrenaline, you're going to be combat ready. You're going to operate at a higher function. And so I went through that process of flooding my system with adrenaline and other stress chemistry. And what I did not understand about the stress response back then is that not only does it get you physically ready for combat, but it also gets you mentally ready as well. And adrenaline helps to really fire up your brain with the oxygen-rich blood, and it sort of gets all your sensory experiences fine-tuned. So, things I could see, smell, taste, touch, hear, everything gets really fine-tuned, and that plays a role as I go through the house. So, went through the back door of that house, and I cleared that house room by room at gunpoint, and the house was a crime scene from back door to front door. There was brain matter all the way through a hallway. There was blood everywhere. It was pretty brutal. So by the time I got to the last room of the house, which is where the victim's body was, I was just so flooded with adrenaline that adrenaline really, all the things I could see, all the things I could hear, all the things I could smell, like I could smell the blood in the air and almost taste it. That's how fine-tuned my sensory experiences were. And what happened was, at the point where I went and leaned over the victim's body, because he'd been covered with a towel, and I peeled the towel back and I looked at what remained of the victim's head. I was looking straight into a skull cavity that was empty of everything. And I guess for me, what happened there was all those experiences, because of the stress response I was under, they got burnt in really deep into my brain, and the adrenaline served to scramble the way my brain processed all those experiences in the moment. And that's what ended up causing some significant issues with post-traumatic stress disorder moving forward in the weeks and then years ahead as well.
So did it feel at the time as though you were coping fine with it? You were just like working through it. It was kind of factual rather than any emotion. Like how does it feel at the time?
That's a good question. So for me, most other investigations, that's exactly how I'd feel. It was all quite analytical. The difference with a lot of the jobs I went to as well, particularly murders and suicides as well, because a lot of those were quite brutal. The uniform guys, my colleagues would ring me up and say, "Samson, mate, we've got this job down here," and they run me through it over the phone. So I'm sort of going in mentally prepared for what I'm about to be confronted with. But this particular homicide, I was the first one through the house. And so, number one, I wasn't ready for what I was about to see. Number two, I was in a really heightened state of stress with that whole fight-flight response. And I think because of that, there was just everything felt different in that house, and it sort of came through in the nightmares I had later on as well. Even the lighting of the house was really eerie. The front door that led down the corridor where all the brains were, it had a yellow stained glass window in it.
Yeah, wow. That's very evocative, even you saying that, yeah.
It's a real eerie lighting that came through. It felt wrong. The whole thing felt wrong. And I could not wait to get out of that house after I looked in and saw what was right, only basically centimetres from my face, looking into what was left of this bloke's face. I could not wait to get out of the house. So I had to be really careful because I'm walking through a crime scene. So like later on, a couple of days later, after the forensic guys had finished what they had to do, I got to walk back through that crime scene again, but this time with an analytical mind. I was going back through and them showing me, this is what we found here, this is what we found there. That experience was light and day different to the first one. Remember at the time that I went through that door, I wasn't aware whether or not there was going to be an offender still within the premises. Yeah. So I had to treat that whole house clearing as a life-threatening situation, like threatening to me.
And also what you were observing seems to have gotten worse with every step.
Well, yeah, and when I saw the damage to the victim, it was just like, what on earth has done this? Like, to me, it was I'd seen a lot of wounds from axes and hammers and knives and also and firearms. I just couldn't work out what had possibly done this. And what had turned out, this fellow had been ordered for some reason unknown only to the murderer, had been ordered during the night to lay down on the floor in that hallway, and then he got executed like point blank range with a shotgun. So that's why the damage was extremely extensive. We ended up catching him. It was a 4-week investigation into that job. Still don't know the motive for it. The crook ended up pleading guilty to it eventually down the track. We had a pretty solid brief on him. But it was 4 weeks where we had this guy. So this is all with a bikie gang attack on our Christmas party. You've got the homicide running, all these things happening. It had been a 4-week investigation we knew who had done it, but we really need to nail down hard the evidence before we go and get him. But this bloke had multiple firearms in his possession. The longer we let him run, the more risk there was to the public and other police if they caught him as well or came across him. So there'd been a lot of pressure over that time. And I think the stress that I've been under, it's pretty intense stress over a 4-week period with all those things happening. And it probably contributed a lot to the PTSD that sort of flowed on from there as well. And it was only a couple of weeks after we got the offender for the murder in handcuffs that the nightmares kicked in for me, and they became recurrent every single night. I'd have the same nightmare where I was about to be brutally murdered myself, and they were so realistic and terrifying. Could never get back to sleep. And for me, that was the first warning sign where I knew I had a problem. We had no education about mental health problems in the cops back in those days. So we're flying blind.
I think it was worse than that in a way, because there was a sort of a culture of, yeah, we all get that. It was accepted. This level of pressure, stress, and the way that your minds and your bodies react to it felt normal.
There was a real culture, and we're still trying hard to break this culture down because it's still there to some degree. Is that I guess we join the police and we get put in a lot of dangerous situations on a regular basis, and you sort of develop a mindset that you've got to be tough enough to take everything. And that sort of feeds into self-care as well. But also we had no training. So the culture was one issue, and it still is, but we had no education, and it improved so much in that space.
I suppose, yeah. I mean, we know, you and I would both know people who'd never heard of PTSD when they were first diagnosed with it.
Well, this is where was
that you?
The only reason that I knew I had a problem with PTSD is the only thing I knew about it was for what I'd seen on movies, etc., Vietnam movies, and people having nightmares. That was the only thing I knew, was nightmares with PTSD. But unfortunately, I didn't understand that there's so many other aspects to the illness or injury as well. And they all started creeping in my life through the back door, and they caused a huge amount of chaos, particularly at home with my family at that time as well. But I lived the next 8 or 9 years, I just kept driving through. And I talked about this with my brother a few times as well. He's had similar experiences where, where you were talking about how obsessive I became in the way I did my job. It was probably a better word for it would be manic. Like I just felt like, because I felt really vulnerable, that I wasn't going to be able to cope, that I just tried to keep making myself tougher. And, I was boxing, I was getting professionally trained in boxing and working out the gym, trying to make myself stronger and fitter and better able to handle the sort of adversaries that I would encounter. But I also was really manic in the way I was doing my job, taking a lot of unnecessary risks for my physical well-being, just always chasing the thrill of the adrenaline rush that I could get any possible way I could, either through intentionally massive loads of stress of the jobs I was running, or by actually the physically risky type operations we'd run as well. And the way I'd sort of describe now is just trying to stay 2 or 3 steps in front of whatever this thing was that's chasing me and trying to pull me down, which is my mental health problems as well.
How was your parenting during that period of time? Because when I was a kid, I had some friends whose dads were Vietnam vets, and they were always the grumpiest, scariest dads that you weren't allowed to go near them when they got home from work. Dad likes his time alone and all that. And just the way you're talking, I wonder how you were at home.
Oh, terrible. It was, I don't see myself as a failure as a dad. I certainly, I've had to, over the years, come to, guilt. We talked about it earlier. It is, if you're racked with guilt and you're held back by guilt, it's such a poisonous emotion to feel for too long. A little bit of self-remorse is good for behavioural change, but too much is not. And I had to go through a period in my life where I had to find a lot of self-forgiveness. So that's an important point to make at the start. But definitely I was not the best dad that I could have been for my boys.
Well, it's hard to be patient. I mean, I don't think what no one tells you about parenting is the amount of patience it requires at the best of times, let alone if you're living in a high pressure, I mean, you're just holding on, as you just mentioned, emotionally. The patience they require is sometimes just not there for you, is it?
Yeah, it was, well, I had none. I had very little patience. There was times I still remember, my kids, like, number one, very little tolerance and patience, but also had a really a sensitive startle response, which is part of the PTSD I didn't understand. Like, if someone dropped something and broke a cup or a plate or anything like that, I'd fly off the handle because it was mainly because the reaction it would cause me, it was instant, like, fear or whatever, which turns into instant anger. So yeah, I was cranky. I was a big drinker back then too. Like, alcohol was one of my key coping strategies for numbing myself out and to help sleep. So they didn't have the best time of it.
And you can't explain it to them, can you? Like, I always try and explain. If I'm being grumpy around the house, I'm usually able to explain to them, sorry, it's this or that. But you couldn't go home and say, sorry, guys, I just saw brains up and down a hallway and it's freaked me out.
Well, this is one of the things too. Like, I never shared anything at home, including with my first wife. Back in those days, I had this. Well, number one, she didn't have any interest in what I was actually doing, so that was helpful. That worked for me because I didn't want to come home and sort of taint my house with the malevolence of the outside world. I just wanted to keep it my sanctuary, and so I never shared a thing. Most she would get from me was if I was off on a job, I've got to go. I've got a murder I'm running. See you later. And that's it. I never shared anything at all. And so with that, there was a lack of understanding and empathy, I guess, in some parts of our home life as well. So it was a horrible, vicious circle. My eldest and my youngest son, they've both had careers in the military since growing up. So they're really understanding of that period of time, and they look at a lot of the positives that they got as well. I didn't have a dad who was a good role model. And the way I reconciled that, came a point in my life where I just thought, mate, you can't live in the past. How we reconciled this whole experience was I made a pact that I'd just try to be a better dad than the one I had, use that negative experience to try to motivate me to be a better dad. And I still remember sitting and having a beer with my son when to celebrate the first grandchild. And then I passed that on to him. I just said, mate, I made this pact with myself to be a better dad than the one I had. I'm passing that on to you now. I challenge you to be a better dad than the one you had, and you pass that down as well. And then, we break cycles. It keeps us trying and that sort of thing too. So hopefully that'll happen.
I think probably by the time, correct me if I'm wrong, but by the time you became a grandfather, I think the fact that you had survived that long was pretty big.
It was when I had what I then used to call a nervous breakdown. Like, it was everything. I just couldn't keep pushing on with the sort of pace and the way I was treating myself over that time. For that 8 or 9 years, I'd lived on somewhere between 2 and 5 hours sleep a night. If I had 5 hours sleep, that was a good night's sleep for me. But that's sort of, you can't keep going with that. All the stress chemistry is flooding the system for all that time. And combined with the alcohol abuse over that period as well, it ended up contributing to my eventual breakdown. And then where everything basically came flooding in, there was nothing I'd do to hold it back. And
when it breaks, it breaks hard, doesn't it?
It broke really hard. It broke so hard. I had no answer to it. And I found myself, I just finished the biggest investigation on a bikie gang I'd ever run in my whole career. And my career was going up. 4 weeks after that we wound that job up, that's when I had my collapse. And I was medically retired from the police force only 9 months later. That's how damaged I was. It didn't take long. They said, mate, get him out.
There's another great moment in that chat with you and Jubes where you start talking about the fact that, and Jube says it should be written above the door of the police training college, that your career probably won't end the way you expect it to. And his certainly didn't, and yours didn't either. How painful was it to let go, to leave on mental health grounds, to leave unwell?
I didn't let go. There was years of torment. It's something. I run programs now that I put together for police that are retiring from the police force, and I run a lot of them. And it's one of the things I talk about is loss of identity and purpose, but mainly loss of identity. And for me, I'd built and I think anyone that's in a job or a profession where it's got a real deep meaning to it, the longer you serve, the deeper your sense of identity around that profession becomes. And for me, I knew myself. It was in my DNA as Detective Sergeant Craig Semple. Everyone knew me as this. My whole adult life had been serving as a cop. And then suddenly to wake up one day and you no longer have a badge, you no longer have the police powers, you're out there like everybody else. And that took years to overcome that, mainly because I didn't understand the grief associated with loss of identity. It's a real grieving process.
And so it must get so much worse before it gets better. I can't imagine that you're able to start to rebuild from that day you leave the coppers, because then after that day, you've got all this stuff to deal with.
Yeah. So what happened was, for me, it was like all the armor. Remember how I said I was trying to make myself tougher, all the boxing, and I had a massive ego during that period of time too. I'd really built myself up to be impenetrable, and then for this to happen, like all that armor, it's like the way I describe it's just like it all fell away, and then I was back to, I don't know, psychologists talk about inner child and that sort of stuff. I don't go that far, but I was sort of back to me again, like to some degree, and I sort of look back at it's. I had that clarity of thought because this had happened. I had that clarity of thought to see that the type of person I'd actually become. I understand why I did become that way, but I didn't like what I saw, and that took a lot of work too. So basically, I was stripped right back to bare bones. So I had PTSD for all that long period of time, but it's the depression that went with the burnout that really floored me, and it ripped me right back to nothing. Over the next few years, I just swam around in circles, no sense of direction. I was just clinging survival. I was plagued with suicidality over that period of time as well, which scared the hell out of me, because as a detective, one of my jobs was to investigate suicides. Countless dozens of suicides I'd attended as a cop. And I never understood that process either back then, but I certainly do now after my own experience of it.
So it's put you back in that really uncomfortable position you hate, where you're on the victim side of the fence rather than the copper, the strong copper.
Absolutely. Well, there was multiple levels of this too, because, I'd always been in control, especially as a detective. I was a leader. I was high achieving. I had total control over and security of my finances, my health, my friends, everything. But then all of a sudden, I'm out of the police force, and my finances are really at the what I saw then as the mercy of an insurance company. I felt financial insecurity, even though probably technically I didn't have any. But also my health, I had no control over it anymore, and the medical professionals were looking after my health. So I felt like I was really relinquished a lot of control of various aspects of my life, which I think definitely contributed to the length of time that I stayed unwell for.
I can't imagine it was good for the marriage either. I mean, you've given us a hint by saying my former wife a couple of times, or my first wife.
Yeah, well, look, my the way I'd treated my marriage over that period of time was just very poor. There was never any violence or anything like that. I was never angry at my wife, never even raised my voice. But, I definitely put my colleagues first. I definitely put going out and drinking and all the social aspect of police work definitely ahead of my relationship with my wife as well. I made some poor decisions over that period of time, and once again, I had to find some self-forgiveness for that. There was probably about 3 years where I really beat myself up very badly about that too. But look, relationships are complicated. It takes two people to make one work, and often takes two for one not to work as well. And so,
But it feels like you almost had a third person in the relationship, being your career so demanding on you psychologically and emotionally that you were both really up against it. Listening to all of this, Craig, I've got to say, how did you survive? Like, this is where we're at now. The process that you're talking to us about is so, I mean, I'm feeling stressed thinking about you at that time, about trying to support you, being your wife or your brother or your friend or your counsellor, anyone trying to support you. It's so deep, this place that you're talking about. How did you recover?
Yeah, well, it's we call it bottom bouncing. Sometimes people have got to hit rock bottom before they start looking up, and that's what happened to me, unfortunately. And it's one of the reasons I do what I do now with mental health education, is trying to help people avoid getting to the low spot that I got to before they start looking up. And for me, it was been 3 years of this ongoing battle, and then there was some pretty significant stuff happened with my dad and other things in my family, and then my marriage broke down. And then I ended up, because I had that battle with suicide that whole period of time, I ended up trying to take my life. And I'm very lucky I survived it, where a lot of other people don't. But that trip to the hospital emergency department and being hooked up to all those machines that night, that really scared the hell out of me, and it really woke me up. I felt like, I wrote a little story about it a couple of days later, that I felt like I walked through this door that had been tempting me for all that period of time, and I'd survived it, and I thought I'm never going back through that door again. So I've got to find a way to get myself back on my feet. And talking about impact on family, it was my eldest son who drove me into the hospital that night. So that was pretty tough. But I still remember laying there in that hospital ward that night, and I said to him, mate, this is never going to happen again. I'm never going to do it to you, to me, to the family. I'm going to find a way to get myself back on my feet. When I got released from hospital, I went out in my lounge room first morning at home, made a pot of tea, sat myself down. I thought, righto, you made this big promise. Now, how are you going to do it? And so I reflected on a lot of stuff, and I'd done a lot of journaling over my recovery period as well, and which is what's led to the books being published. But so I sat there and just wrote everything out. I just wrote what had led me to be this point, and it really hit me that morning. I thought, what was a big 3 years ago, you're running logistically incredibly complex investigations into gangsters, and then for the last 3 years, you're barely able to function, even putting sandwiches together for your kids to go to school, right? So what's the difference? And what I realised was, in the police force, in my whole career, every single thing we did, we wouldn't launch an investigation or do a raid or anything without a plan. Mm. And that's what I realised I'd been missing, was a plan. We had no plan. So basically, I've been going to hundreds of hours of appointments with psychologists, etc. But at no point during the whole time I was being taught different therapies, etc., was there a line drawn in the sand, say, right, all that trauma, yep, we've talked about it. It's nothing we can do about it. It's in the past. Now we're going to learn to live with it better. So what we need a plan. Where do we want to be in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months? And what are the strategies we're going to put into place to get ourselves there?
And I don't think that's just a police thing either. I think a lot of us suffer for that, for not having a plan for our own self-care or for getting ourselves out of a, depression or a bad spot. That's such a good point.
What I decided to do that day, I just decided to treat my recovery from that day on like I'm running a police investigation. I actually got myself in that mindset. It was so important because I thought, right, I plan, get some strategies, let's get some actions going and some goals. And I made sure that, say for exercise, right, it was one of my game plan strategies to get myself back on my feet. I'm such a massive advocate for exercise with mental health. Not enough can be said about it. But, for me, it was surfing was something I had done a lot of before I had what I then called a breakdown. I now call it a breakthrough. Language is really important in this space. But surfing, I was a captain of the police surfing club in New South Wales when I was in the police force. I would surf before work. If I wasn't boxing before work, I was surfing. It was a massive part of my life. For the 3 years I've been out of the police, I'd largely given it away, mainly because of the depression that I'd been living with.
Yeah, it's debilitating, isn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely floored me. So my action for exercise, minimise risk of surrender, was, mate, every day you just get that board, go down the beach, and all you have to do is get wet. There's no time limit or anything like that, just get wet. And if you do that, you can pat yourself on the back and go home. And then on the days where my mood was really low and I didn't want to be there, I'd just say to myself, mate, all you got to do is walk 30 metres down the beach there, jump in the water, then you can get out and go home. Well done. But I jump in the water and then I go, we're here now. And so minimising risk of surrender was a real key part of my game plan. I did that for meditation, therapy called cognitive behaviour therapy. I launched into that with a whole lot more commitment, had actions for that one as well. So for each, I probably had about 7 or 8 different strategies that I drew upon. And for each one, I had just one real small achievable action, how I can put each of these things into my life from that day moving forward. And there was no one thing that got me back on my feet. I don't think there is any magic bullet out there for trauma-related mental health problems or depression. For me, it was just having a big bowl full of strategies that all, especially with full commitment to them, they all complemented each other. And it was more holistic about how I eventually got back on my feet.
It also makes you feel like a functioning human again, doesn't it? When you get to the end of the day and you look back and you go, I did all my things today. I meditated, I got wet, I, did all the things, and that gives some confidence.
Yeah, this is why I think exercise is a great strategy for recovery as well, because if you have a game plan for recovery, and exercise is a key part of it, you go and commit to your exercise part of your game plan first thing in the day, and that gives you that sense of reward, from achievement that you're talking about. And that's, you get dopamine hit from that. It gives you more motivation to follow through with the other things you do as well. And, I think having a game plan for any adversity we face in our lives is really important, because if you don't, especially when you've got multiple things going on in your life, it can sort of there's all chaos up here, all the thoughts and ruminations. But when you have a game plan, you write down what your key challenges are and the actions that you need to put into place. And it sort of creates order from chaos with adversity as well. But probably the key part of my whole recovery, though, was actually getting into advocacy work with what I do now with mental health. And
yeah, tell us what you do now. I mean, those 2 books that we just mentioned, The Cop Who Fell to Earth and Getting Back Up Again, which were released in 2023 and 2024. So they're obviously part of your life now, part of your work. And but we know that if former police, when they can make it through a breakthrough, they oftentimes become excellent educators when it comes to mental health. I think it is all about all the skills that you gather through your career, and you're able to bring them to this space. So what are you doing now? What's your passion now?
Well, I've run my own business, Mentality Plus. It's a company that I put together to deliver mental health first aid training. I'll put my own programs together too for mental health awareness, well-being, resilience. I've got a program called Growing Through Transition, which is for police that are transitioning out of their careers in the police force. And the insurance company, EML, have been so supportive in backing that. So is the police force transition unit. So we've got a really strong relationship with both of those organisations, and they've been instrumental in getting this off the ground as well. And now it's only been running for about 3 or 4 years. We've put hundreds and hundreds of cops through this program, and it's really built a lot of momentum. And the main focus of the program now is just part of the program is me sharing my recovery journey, just to give people these police, especially with psychological injuries, a bit of an idea about how a recovery game plan can work, but also give them some hope that they see I got through it. And in the situation I was in, that I managed to get through it. If Craig can get through it, I can get through it too. And hope and belief is such a huge ingredient for recovery from any mental health problem. And so just trying to foster a little bit of that hope is important. But I mean, I didn't just fall into this. I did it as a volunteer for a number of years with the Black Dog Institute, going out and sharing my story of high school kids all over the country, and mostly on my motorbike, touring around and calling into schools and talking to these kids. And the volunteer work for me, it's one of my key strategies that I share with cops that are going through this now, is that a lot of them, like I did, think you can't, if you're on workers' compensation, you can't go out and volunteer, but you can. And one of the great things about volunteer work as a healing strategy is that it's not the same contractual type obligations that you get with paid employment. And you can go and find something when you give back, when you give to people for no financial reward, when that the whole process of giving back is so good for healing. These kids that I had so many interactions with, thousands of them over that couple of years that I did that volunteer work for Black Dog, at the point where I ended up in that hospital emergency ward, my emotional bucket was dead empty. But my interactions with these kids over those couple of years, beautiful interactions, they filled my bucket back up again for me, which I think was a key part of my whole where I am now.
Yeah, it's a real exchange, isn't it, volunteering, especially if you can find a space that really gels with you. And I think particularly for you blokes who really have this strong need to give back, to exchange like that with people, which is what you have done all your career. But the exchanges that you've had throughout your career have oftentimes been so incredibly emotional with victims' families, with people like that. So did you have to learn to wean yourself off the extremities of your life, the depth of the sort of emotional exchanges that you were having as a copper?
So for me, the worst part of what I went through over that period of time when I got out of the police was the hypervigilance. Like I was constantly on alert for problems all the time. I could never settle. I still remember I called up one of my mates in the detectives at Coffs Harbour one day. So I went down to the beach to have a coffee, do what my psychologist told me to do, get out there and look at the beauty in the world. And I sat there and I watched a couple of cars pull up next to each other and people swap into each other's cars. And I thought, I know what's going on here. So,
yeah.
So I called him up and I said, mate, have you got any cops up here? Because I'm watching a drug deal happen right now. And he jokingly said to me, Samps, mate, if you keep ringing us like this, we're going to have to sign you up as an informant. I said, mate, am I that bad? And he said, yeah. And that's why I realised, I actually felt like I'd gone crazy, that I just couldn't switch it off because what had happened.
But can you switch it off? Can you ever become a normal person like us and not notice that?
Yeah, you can. Well, not necessarily not notice, but at least not get hijacked by it. So with that back then, I was still deeply hardwired through all my experience in the police force to not let anything slip through. Anything that was out of place, I'd catch it. So that was a deep hardwiring that took over the years a lot of work to rewire my brain. It's through something called neuroplasticity. You can actually rewire. I didn't understand it back then. I certainly do now. And all the things that I did over my recovery journey, including practicing gratitude, challenging negative thinking, practices through cognitive behavior therapy, exercise, meditation, all of those things. It took a couple of years of really hard work with my game plan. That over time, I sort of did rewire my brain and physically change my brain structure. Made my amygdala, which is the old fight-flight part of your brain, less reactive. So things like someone doing a drug deal in front of me, now I might see something like that and I'll just, I'll notice it, but it doesn't grip me and pull me into it that I feel like I really need to do something about it.
So you can leave it alone. You can say, that's none of my business and get, wow, that's a massive.
Yeah, it is huge. And it's, however, there is times that I can't let go of that old duty bound. I mean, I had a house fire in a house next to me a couple of years ago. Someone came and knocked on my door and told me about it, and I ran straight through and put the fire out, did CPR on my neighbour, tried to save his life, all these sort of things. You'd never lose it.
No, and you don't want to lose that. I mean, you don't want to be a person who says, I don't care about your house fire.
No, it was that side of it, but it's also for me. I see. So the hypervigilance I experienced back then, I got that under control to the point where, sure, if something, say at home and at night time, if something feels out of place, I'll be onto it. And even Kyla, my wife now, she's even commented, it actually makes us feel secure in the house knowing that you are so switched on to things, but it's not to the point where, like back in my police days, where I would be like absolutely like terrified that something bad was about to happen to my family. That was where it hijacks you. And so now it sort of doesn't have that adverse impact on my life anymore. I'll harness it when I need it. But mostly I feel like I'm far more rounded than I've ever been in my whole life now, just through all that hard work that I put in over those years. I don't want to set this up and make it sound like I'm now sitting on some mountaintop, humming and chanting. But I certainly do go through. The way I look at it, I still experience challenges and adversities just like everyone else does, and I get put under extreme stress at different times as well, and at different times I cope better than others. But if I look where I am now compared to where I was, during that recovery period with my mental health problems, like it's just worlds apart, and I'm really content now. Happiness is something that I've never strived for. I think it's a little bit elusive trying to, grab that euphoric happiness that you get once in a blue moon. I know when we got married in April, and that was truly one of the happiest days of my life. But most of the time, I'm just happy to be content, if that makes sense, and so much more achievable as well.
Thank you to our guest, Craig Semple. His books, The Cop Who Fell to Earth and Getting Up Again, are available now. If you need support after listening to this podcast, you can call Lifeline on 13 11 14 or contact 1800-RESPECT on 1800 737 732 or 1800respect.org.au. Indigenous Australians can contact 13 Yarn on 13 92 76 or 13yarn.org.au.
The producers of this podcast recognise the traditional owners of the land on which it's recorded. They pay respect to the Aboriginal elders past, present and those emerging.